Tips Analysis. I hope you're feeling positive because this is the Introverted Positron, and welcome to another episode of Tips Analysis. Today I want to talk about a specific game in a specific series that I really enjoy myself, and I want to talk about why I enjoy it as much as I do. And that is specifically why I'm excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. Now, this is a fun one for me, a really fun one for me, because this was a surprise. So, back in the Wii era of games, we had some interesting stuff. I mean, I wouldn't say the console was lacking in games. I would say more that it was lacking in good games. And I'm not saying that there aren't many good games for the Wii. There's tons. I can name quite a few, such as Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, Zelda Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess, Okami, lots of sports games, some of which are unfortunate. But the thing is that the console kind of became a place for a lot of subpar party games, which was unfortunate. So that's kind of the reason why the Wii isn't my favorite console, but that's beside the point. We're not going to get there. We're not going to go there today. But what I do want to talk about is the fact that there were a lack of RPGs in the system in particular. There were a couple things that kind of border on it, such as Fire Emblem, Paper Mario, or should I say Super Paper Mario. Lots of games like that. But there was not really any really in-depth RPGs outside of maybe Tales of Symphonia, Dawn of the New World. And it was something that I really wanted for the system, especially since for the GameCube there were so many games that I liked for it that were RPGs, such as Skies of Arcadia, Tales of Symphonia, both Baden Kaitos and Baden Kaitos Origins. Lots and lots of games for the system that I really enjoyed. And then, when I was looking more into the system, into the Wii, I stumbled upon a name for a game that was doing very well, that was very well liked at the time in Europe, and that was Xenoblade Chronicles. Xenoblade Chronicles was exciting to me because it was an RPG and one that looked like it was really, really good. And so I kind of kept track of it for a little while. It was only in Europe for, I think, a year or two. And then it finally got announced for the West, and that was so exciting to me. Not for the West. Europe is the West. For the North American continent. So more specifically the US and Canada. In particular, anyway. And so we ended up with that game eventually. And I had been keeping track of it, and I ended up having the money to buy it because I've been saving up for it for a while, and because I was actually on a trip, and my parents gave me some shopping money for that trip, which is not the best thing to admit, but yeah, I helped me get that game at the time, because otherwise I wouldn't be able to afford it. Yeah, so I finally got Xenoblade Chronicles, and I played it, and I was stunned. In all honesty, I was stunned by the game. It was not anything that I was expecting out of a game such as this, which is the whole point of the game was the scale. That was kind of one of the big points in terms of the presentation, was that you had to feel the scale of your character to these worlds. And to put everything into perspective, the premise of the game is that it is taking place on top of a titan. Basically, it's in a world where two titans, essentially gods, were fighting one another, and then when they clashed, they eventually both stabbed ending blows on each other, and they stopped moving, and now life lives on these titans. And it's about a war between the life on what's called the Bionis and the life on what's called the Mechonis. And so it's mechanical life and biological life. And that in and of itself is very interesting. But I'm not going to ruin the story. But the point is that the scale of these titans, the scale of these things that you're living on, is always made very present in the game. Whether it's you see the other titan in the distance, or whether it's you're simply standing on the shoulder of a titan, or I don't think you ever do the shoulder actually, but the leg of a titan, and you see like huge structures. And mountains and stuff like that. Like it's a really cool game to play, and it's really creative. And that was something that surprised me. And then the other things that surprised me was the complexity of the game and its battle system. So more specifically, the game has a relatively simple battle system, but it can be surprisingly complex when you start being able to combine abilities and stuff. And also kind of relies on this whole affinity system that's in the game, which basically is like a system where you kind of like build up people's relationships, and then that allows you to share abilities, which is a really cool system, and it forces you to use different characters, and it forces you to kind of do things differently. Eventually you can actually do certain conversations to help to raise affinity more, but also kind of progress the characters in the story, and that is, again, really cool. Like, this, everything about this game was just like amazing to me. Not that it doesn't have its problems, it certainly does. Especially in the fact that like every side quest is basically collecting items or fighting monsters. Those are really the only two things you do. And most of the side quests are pretty unexciting, except for a couple, which are pretty good. And there's many problems. But for me, this game was amazing, and to date, it remains probably my favorite JRPG outside of maybe Breath of the Wild, because that kind of goes more into that RPG territory than any other Zelda game. Maybe Breath of the Wild, but I think I'm going to set that aside for now, and I'm going to say that Xenoblade Chronicles is my all-time favorite RPG as of this moment. RPG, period. So, of course, going from there, a few years ago now, Xenoblade Chronicles X was announced, and of course I was excited. But when it came out, not that it's a bad game, in fact it's a very good game, very fun, and I would recommend trying it out if you enjoy the first game, but it has its issues, mostly in that it kind of suffers from characters being a little too simple. The world is massive, but it doesn't feel nearly as creative as the first one, although there are some really cool environments. It's on an alien world versus kind of a whole other world with its own rules, which is Xenoblade, so it's sci-fi versus fantasy kind of idea. Yeah, and it's just the progression of the game is a little odd, especially with stuff like mechs in the game, which are cool, but that kind of breaks the progression a little bit, because then you're kind of relying more on what mechs you buy and stuff like that. Anyway, it's a really cool game. I really, really enjoyed it, but there were a lot of things that just didn't match up to the first one, in my opinion, especially the music. The music in the first game is absolutely spectacular. It's my favorite soundtrack of all time for video games. Yeah, it was just too bad on that front. But then there's, well, now we have Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which looks to be returning to that form of the first one, which is that it's more of a story-based game. It has characters that are going over after a very set goal and a very linear track, which is not a bad thing. But the thing about these games, including the first one, is that the first one had very large areas you could explore, and very much areas that felt alive and thriving with creatures and interesting things to see. Not like something like, unfortunately, Tales games nowadays, where they kind of have like some boring environments and mostly are just filled with monsters. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing from this game is more of that. In fact, it takes many of the same settings from the first one. It takes the same composers from the first game, which makes me incredibly excited. And it takes the whole setting where you're on Titans again, only this time there are a lot more Titans. Although I don't know how they're related to each other in this game, which is going to be interesting to figure out. So it's going to be interesting when it finally comes out, but I'm so excited for it. Not because there's old teams or old music and stuff like that, but because it's from a series that I loved, and because it's one that is shown to have learned from the first game in particular, and probably from the second game as well, and just to improve on those systems that were awesome in that. And I'm really excited to see it. I really hope it does surpass my expectations. If I'm disappointed, I'm disappointed. That's alright. I never set my expectations as a standard. I always allow what I see to shift my expectations of what I see in the game, even if I have really high expectations to start, because I want to judge a game for what it is, not for what I hoped it was, which I think is something that a lot of people get stuck into. But yeah, so that's why I'm very excited for Xenoblade Chronicles 2, because it looks awesome. And it also looks like there's just going to be so much to look forward to in the game. And I really hope that it lives up to those expectations. But I guess we'll see. In any case, I think that's all for now. See you soon. Bye. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps with the channel, and it's always appreciated. I'm going to leave some links here so you can go check out some other stuff on my channel, or you can always just search the channel. There's lots of stuff for people, playlists, and all that stuff. And so on that note, thank you again. Have a great day, and remember to keep positive.